Good morning. It's October 15th, 2025. For the record, this is Yahweh Elohim, Yahuwah, Yahweh, Adonai Hashem. He who comes from heaven is on earth. It's about 11:10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, today's theme is actually going to be about Stranger Things and the real Stranger Things. You know, it's amazing this world could have things manifest and they don't even really know the root of it, right, or where it comes from. And other than the Duffer Brothers growing up in Durham, North Carolina, I grew up in Rowan County, North Carolina, which in the show Stranger Things, that's the county, Rowan, just spelled differently. In the show it's R-O-A-N, and the town that I grew up in was called Granite Quarry, and it was spelled R-O-W-A-N. Several of the names of the roads, Curly Road was actually a road that I lived off of, Curly and Gold Knob. And the quarry, I played in the quarry and it's funny because I guess the kids in the movie or the show are about 7th and 8th grade. Well, the times that I'm actually thinking of were the times that I was in 7th and 8th grade. I went to Irwin Middle, and then later on went to East Rowan High School before I moved to Florida. Well, was drugged to Florida. So, I bring this up because people that know me on a more personal level than obviously my churches or you know, people that are in the know about my nature and who I am. But when I was a kid, you know, you could say I was the real deal. I was the real life Stranger Things, you know, more similar to El, which I think is also interesting, you know, because I'm Yahweh Elohim, but El is God, Hashem, right? Anyway, it's really interesting because when I was younger, I never struggled making friends. I struggled keeping friends. Very similar to now. Because when I've covered a lot when I was like a child, a baby. But I haven't really talked about things that when I was in my youth, you know, from 13 to like 17, really. But my time in North Carolina, in Rowan County, was littered with the real supernatural things. And watching Stranger Things, I mean, obviously I know it was filmed in Georgia, but the entire principle, and again, like the similarities in the county, the similarities in the sheriff, the similarities in the names of places, you know, the visual cues are off the charts. And I mean, people that know me or have known me in the past, like way, obviously this is back in, you know, this is back in 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003. So way before streaming, way before internet was everywhere. I never even had a computer as a kid. I didn't have a cell phone until I was 20. But the actual stories, you know, are many. You know, back in those days, we would play at the quarry frequently. And every time I was around, a lot of people would like leave. You know, they thought weird things always happened around me. And that was true. You know, there was a time in my front yard that I've said this, you know, I was really interested in like at the time, like North American snakes and stuff. And anyway, I built an enclosure before I had a snake, and I didn't go to the pet store. I literally had 2 green baby snakes fall right from the sky. Put them in the cage. And people, at the time, they didn't believe me, but then they were like, well, I don't know how you found 2 green tree snakes. I've never even seen one, most people. And that wasn't the weird thing. Like, that was just kind of an offhanded one. But one of them was, Asher and I were talking the other day, and we're looking to move to Arkansas. And that's no surprise. And we were looking at the snow, because she's never really seen snow. The kids have never seen snow. So we want to move to a place that gets snow. And I was telling her, I was like, well, as a kid, in North Carolina, like, I feel like, man, we had these big snowstorms, these big things. Well, she goes and looks up and under, this, like, underground weather, not underground, like, I think it was named underground, but anyway, it's an archive of weather for the last, like, 50 years. And she was looking at it, and she was like, oh my gosh. She was like, it actually gets between, like, only 4 and 6 inches a year. She's like, but in the charts, so she's looking at it, and she's like, but the time that you lived there, like, it spiked huge. And I mean, it was just clear as day. You see this weather line, and it was just straight boom, bam. And it's because when I lived there, I was wanting more snow, and then they called it like the storm of the century back then. And the entire town, all the towns, they were frozen in ice. Like 6 inches of ice, like this thick, clear. I mean, you couldn't even get into your car. You couldn't, everything. And that wasn't even that weird. One of the weirdest ones was on a summer day. I was out in the front yard, and it was raining. And I had a thought, how cool would it be if the ground was like a waterbed, and the ground began to swell up just like a waterbed. And I'm not talking a few inches, I mean at least 1.5 to 2 feet. The entire lawn swole up, and it was like a blob. The whole front and side yard, I mean big, at least 3/4 of an acre, this whole land swollen. And I mean, obviously I had witnesses, my mom, and she's just like, well, this is just another weird thing that's going on in my life, and I don't know why. My sister just thought it was cool, my brother thought it was cool, like, but then, anybody from the outside, like this guy I grew up with, I'll try to not use names, because I don't want people to go, like, interrogate them. I mean, you're welcome, if they're open and willing to share these things with the public, I'm fine with that. I'm just saying I don't want to violate their privacy. But my friend came over and he was trying to look at it and like understand it. He was having a moment here, because he was like not even sure what he was seeing. And anyway, and I'm telling him, I'm like, dude, I'm like I said this and this thing happened, and he's like he was trying to, he's like what? And I like took a stick and I poked a hole right in the lawn, and this geyser comes up, and he was just like, what? Well, anyway. And again, that's not even a weird one either, really. What is weird though is my best friend at the time, who could handle the weirdness, because he was kind of weird. Not supernaturally weird, he was just kind of a weird guy. Well, we were at the quarry, and it was just him and I, and the quarry looked very similar to in Stranger Things, like where it had this driveway that goes down to the quarry, and then the opposite side it has this 50 to 75 foot rock face that as kids, we would go up to the top. It looked so similar too. It had that gravel road on top, and then a ledge we would jump off of, and of course bullies hung out there, like what have you. Well, this particular time, my friend and I were at the quarry, and just kind of banging around, just checking things out or whatever. And well, he was like walking this tight, like side edge on one of the sides of the quarry. And I remember looking at him, and I remember thinking, man, you are about to fall and die. And before the thought completely ran through my head, before those words were echoed through my actual mind, I saw him fall about 30 at least 30 or 40 feet. Right on his back, his head smashed against the granite. This is a rock quarry, mind you, so he did not land in the water. He landed. So in quarries, it was like these giant steps, right? And he climbed down from like the top, and then trying to walk this like 4-inch ledge to try to get to like a location that we couldn't get to from anywhere else. Well, anyway, he falls, and I run up, run down, and anyway, I get down there, and for all intents and purposes, he's dead. This is my best friend. And I pick him up, and I just kept saying, I'm like, you're not dead, like, you're not going to do this, because, like, I don't have a friend in the world except for you. Well, anyway, so I get him out to the front of the quarry. Somebody finally stops the car, and then they obviously fast forward. Cops show up. Cops look at the scene. He gets rushed to the hospital. He ended up surviving, and I never saw my friend again. His mother called. Well, when my mom called his mom to see how he was doing, my mom got cussed out by his mom and said that, I'm cursed, I'm a black hole, I'm just, no good comes of me or something. And in my mind, I knew that if it wasn't for me, he would have died. So it's sad that people had that predisposition with me. And then, on the other end, because people would say rumors, how the human race is, right? They get one sniff of something and then they talk a lot. Well, and then it came down to, never seeing people again after a weird thing. I remember being it was around Halloween time, and I remember like some cousins of mine, even some adults, we were kind of going on like a haunted trail type of thing. And as I'm walking through it, I remember just having thoughts like, man, I really wanted to get a kind of a scare, and so I just imagined like a real witch house with like a well, and this was about the time that the movie The Ring came out, and so a lot of the younger kids and like the cousins and stuff, they were all freaked about that, and so I made manifest an old 200-year-old house included with a smoking chimney, and they went in it, they opened it, they touched it, and they couldn't believe it. And they were like, we've walked these woods for generations and we've never seen this before. And then on the way back, we encountered a well as well, and anyway, that was the last time I saw about 7 people that I once knew. And then I remember as a kid in the same woods, the same area, and that's another thing, like comparing it to the Stranger Things, it's just, even the mall, like visually looked so much like the mall that I rarely went to as a kid, but I still remembered it. But I remember telling my mom's boyfriend at the time, he's dead now, and that was another thing, he kind of felt like he was always on me because he was always suspicious. He was really big into Jesus, and he was an alcoholic and a drug addict, but he was still big into Jesus. And he told my mother that he was convinced that I was some sort of demon or the devil or something, because he's like, every time your kid comes around people, he's like, someone ends up dying. Like, he was all up my butt. And then one time, I got lost in the woods for a few days. I wasn't really lost, but I wasn't around them, and I wasn't at someone's house. But I remember when I said something to the effect that, you know, nobody knows Watchers Woods like me. You know, he was talking about the Watchers, and then he started trying to make references to this and that and the other. And then I made a reference to the Book of Enoch, which at the time, I'm like 13. I've never read the Book of Enoch. This was before computers, obviously. Nobody back in those days never even heard of the Book of Enoch, except for literary scholars and, you know, secret books in the Masons and different places that they house those things. Definitely not a regular 13-year-old, right, from Rowan County, North Carolina. But I had the knowledge, and I don't know. I just know that when I need it, it's there. Like, it's hard to just, like, sit back and just talk about everything all at once. But it's kind of like when I need it, it's there. Anyway, yeah. So he's dead now. Many people are. Yeah, it's crazy because, like, and again, even the scenes are very, very interesting because, like, Gold Knob Road, Curly Road, McAfee Road, and even the downtown Hawkins. Like, if you were to Google, that's another thing, you can verify everything I'm telling you. Just Google it. Rowan County, North Carolina. I lived in Granite Quarry. Balfour Quarry was the quarry in which my friend died, and I brought him back to life. And then another thing, I remember being at the quarry a separate time, and these kids were talking about, like, you know, why isn't the quarry open anymore? You know, kids are just kind of swirling conspiracy theories. And I remember joking and saying something to the effect, like, just for random talking with kids my own age, with my own peers, and I was like, man, wouldn't it be cool if there was, like, a train, you know, that was carrying all this gold or something, you know, that, like, it fell through the ground and then, like, the ground ate it up and it had all these different tunnels. Well, then, like, by just seeing that, like, next thing you knew, somebody brings to me, like, an article that I'm pretty sure didn't exist until I said it. And then the article was saying, like quarry opened in 1906, and, like, it, anyway, exactly what I said. Like, the train, you know, basically this train derailment led to the discovery of, like, a huge, like, granite deposit or something to that effect. Anyway, and it was like saying the train's still down there because the water table is one of the deepest in North Carolina, and it actually goes down like hundreds of feet, and then it actually goes under the granite, you know. And then, like, in reference to the Stranger Things as well, when it talks about, like, these tunnels, this was probably one of the most significant ones, I think. It was with a friend I had made about my 8th grade year, and I went over to his house, which was only a few miles away, and remember we're out playing in the woods, and, you know, I remember he wanted to do, like, let's do the trampoline or something, and I was like, no. I was like, let's go exploring. And he's like, okay, like, and so we're walking, and I don't really recall how long we were walking, but I know that we came upon, for lack of a better terms, a building. Doesn't look similar in appearance to Hawkins' lab, but what it did have, or the absence of, there was no graffiti. There were trees that were grown through, like, growing up through the windows and out, and it was this huge complex, and it looked just like a research lab. And I remember we like pulled open these types of doors, and it was flooded. Like, but it was stairs, and I mean, as far as the eye could see, it was stairs that were going underground. Even though it was flooded, there were lights, and that's what not creeped out. It terrified my friend. And then I remember that was the last time I saw him. His mom wouldn't even drive me home. But I remember I didn't leave when he left. Most every time people would leave kind of the same way, and I would stay to do my own investigation because I thought it was great. I thought it was just, we are opening parts of the earth that have never been opened before. And you know, I don't know. You know, it's hard to say. It's hard to say because when I think of that, that's what I mean. I can't explain why Stranger Things exists. I mean, I didn't go and tell the Duffer Brothers to make it. But the similarities I can't ignore. One. And two, I remember hearing arguments, and I remember one of the arguments was something to the effect that my mom was born in 1966, and my mother was accused by, you want to call them friends, I guess, but anyway, if you can just imagine kind of the tumultuous moment where these weird things keep happening in and around me. My mom is trying to be somewhat normal, but if you've ever known me on a personal level, you know that normal is about as far away from who I am and what any type of life that I've ever had here has ever been like. And my mom essentially was called out. This lady, I don't know if she's still alive or dead. I'm not going to check because I don't care, but she made an accusation against my mother and said that I'm so weird because my mom was a part of like an MK Ultra type of thing. And the argument, like, I remember it very clearly, like these parts, and it was like, you know, your parents sent you upstate to have all this stuff done to you, you know, and that's why your kid is like so screwed up and nobody wants to be around him, and he should even like leave town, leave school, like nobody in this town wants you or your family here. You know, my mom, like, you know, no, like, my son is wonderful, he's, you know, normal, like, and then I remember the lady, like, very, like, ha, and, like, getting mad, and then she, like, shook my mom, and she was like, people have died, and kids have died, and, like, all these things, like, very, very dramatic, and you know, I don't even know why I'm saying this. I guess it's not for anyone else but for me, I guess. Because I guess I've repressed a lot of things. You know, I've repressed a lot of things, and, you know, in my pursuance of being normal my whole life, you know, led me in a way to isolation, because I kind of figured, well, if I'm not around anybody, you know, then nothing bad could happen. And it's like, I know that if I love these, like, certain people, like, it's weird. It's like if I love them, like my mom, you know, my wife, my kids, my pets, my creation, those things tend to do really, really well. Not well in the eyes of humanity. Like, my mom has always had issues, and I have spoke with my mom about this very lightly over the past few years, and my mom has a lot of blank spots that she's brought out to the conversation, you know, and she says, like, you know, yeah, I was involved in some weird things. And then the weirdest part about this was, I'll try and look it up. Because my grandfather was Thomas Coleman in the United States military, and he worked on the USS Eldridge. And my mom, when she was a little girl, would travel along with him. And I'm gonna take a break. And we're back. So, my grandfather worked on the USS Eldridge, and we'll go with that. The song. But, and I didn't understand what that meant as a kid, and I still don't really understand what that means as an adult, because when it comes to the God powers, you know, I guess we're having a bit of a moment of honesty here. There are certain lanes and avenues that are open to me where I can see into hearts and minds, which is very eerie too, because like in the show where it shows Elle being able to locate people, places, and things by just kind of going into like the upside down world and then sourcing it. That's very similar to how I do it. But I never knew, like, you know, what my grandfather did, but I just remember as a kid, my mom always, like, when she would get drunk, she would get really upset, and she would start crying, and she would start, like, apologizing to me, and, you know, she would tell me, like, she doesn't know who her real father is. And I mean, it wasn't a secret. Like, Tom Coleman was not my mom's biological father, but my grandmother claimed that she didn't know who my mom's biological father is. And my grandmother basically spent the remaining, all her life completely drunk. There was massive skeletons in the family closet type of thing, where even when I came down to Florida at 16 years old, like, the family dissolved. Like, my uncle did not want to be in, near, or around my mother or me. I remember fights, like the one time we had a family Christmas dinner, and I remember, again, that fight erupting, and he blamed my mom on, for everything, and he blamed whatever happened to her is, like, what is the reason the whole family is so fucked up. And my mom is, like, telling me, different occasions, many occasions, she'd get drunk and, she would tell me, she's like crying, and she's like, I swear to you, I swear to God, and she's like, I swear to Jesus, that I never was with a man. And she's like, And then she's like, and I just don't remember like a big part of my childhood. And she was saying that she remembers being in like an orphanage home. And then like the only orphanage home like anywhere remotely near us was called the Nazareth Children's Home. And she was like, it wasn't that. And then like I remember my mom like and me would go on adventures, and we'd be looking for these places that she remembered as a kid. And she would tell me like it had this pool and it was like emerald green, and she remembers like other kids. And then like it was just so strange. And then she would tell me like, your grandfather said that, when he was working on like the Eldridge or something, like he met my mama like before then. I believe my grandfather was born in like 1930, and like my grandmother was born in like 1933. But anyway, I remember his office being like highly decorated, but likewise like very mysterious. I don't know. It's weird because I can go into other people's mind, body, and soul, and I can kind of backtrack things with clarity and precision, but I can't do it to myself, and that's frustrating. I can't do it to a select people, and I have yet to understand what quantifiables are what makes it where I can and cannot go into someone's mind and track and go into the past and see things. It's like the files have been deleted. Or they've been corrupted with fake files. And then I remember as a kid, probably like 3rd and 4th grade, so about the time Cameron is now. So I watch Cameron really carefully because I want to see how kind of his mutations are going to go. And I remember going to like these like neurological institutes, and not that I was ever diagnosed with anything. Like, I was never diagnosed with anything. But I do remember being hooked up to these brain monitors multiple occasions, and I remember that before we would do something like that, I remember my grandmother and grandfather would fly from Florida all the way to North Carolina. And then they would take me out to like lunch, and this place was called M&K Barbecue, which was on Main Street in Granite Quarry, or another one, which was called Wink's Barbecue, which was in Salisbury, North Carolina. And the institute, I remember, was right next to a park in Salisbury, North Carolina. And I remember it. As a kid, I used to think like, wow, like my grandparents really loved me. They were flying all the way up here just to take me to a doctor's appointment. But it didn't feel like love. Like, it ain't like that they were talking to me, like, no, it was mainly them talking to themselves. And then I remember going and getting, I used to call them Carolina dogs. They were like pink and sweet, and they had like onions, and like they were really good. That and potato wedges. And then I remember we'd go to the park, and I would play in these tunnels. And then my grandfather would say, okay, Joshua, let's go. Let's go ahead and walk up there. And you could walk from the park to this institute. And then it's just like little glimpses and flashes of, like, I go there and then they're asking me all these things, like, what are my dreams like? And then they would start like doing these things with cards and like just all kinds of stuff, and they never really told me what I was doing. I guess at the time I thought that maybe everybody did this. I don't know, to be honest. And then 4th grade was the first time I had people from, I assume, the government or something involving a government came to visit me and pulled me out of class. And then I was super, super smart. But then I remember after this visit with these 2 gentlemen that were, now as an adult, I assume they were from the government. I mean, I know they had to be. As a kid, I didn't know. But I remember them taking me to a room. They had this huge tray. And sorry, my wife is on a meeting in the other room. So, about the distractions. So I remember they put in front of me this I'm gonna take 5, maybe she'll finish. Okay, I think she's back. She's a corporate leader, so she has like one-on-ones that she does. Anyway, so I remember they pulled out this big tray. They were blocks. They were white and black, and they were, like kind of half and half in different like combinations on each block. And I remember the 2 guys, I remember they recorded it. And I remember when I asked them, I was like, what is this for? Oh, it's for your own good. Oh, okay. Like, in the moment, I remember thinking, like, maybe they're going to see how smart I am and let me not go to school anymore. That wasn't the case, but I can tell you that I was then taken out of normal classes, that when I ended up going to school, I remember my mom had a hard time getting me sometimes to school, because my mom at some points in her life made it her life's mission to figure out the truth of her origins, the truth of who her father was, the truth of what happened to her, the truth of where she was for 10 years of her life that she absolutely cannot remember. And my mother didn't have a drop of drink, never had a dope until after I was born. And I remember that in some way, shape, or form, the federal government has been in my life since I was a child. And I remember the first official time, like, seeing and meeting them was at that school. And that school was Rockwell Elementary in North Carolina. And I was in Miss Simmons' 4th grade class. And when they came, I did the blocks. And then I remember having my class changed And I don't know why. I don't know why. But it seemed to be any time I started getting close to a friend, or I started like developing a more personal like relationship with a friend somewhere, or started talking, I guess, essentially anytime I started talking about anything, it felt like we moved. I moved schools again. And it didn't matter what school I went to in North Carolina or in Florida. It was always, this is the normal thing, and I'm somewhere over here. And I remember when I came down, I mean, I didn't even finish a traditional high school experience. I didn't even finish a traditional high school experience. I mean, I graduated at 16 years old. And it wasn't even for any other reason but I just told them to. It was like, some people are easy to work my will, whereas others, not so easy. But I digress. And then I remember, I remember specific times when I was a teenager. I remember not like using drugs or drinking or anything. Not until later, but I mean, never drugs, but like I did drink heavily when I was a young adult because I kind of was struggling, I guess, with these things, and I don't really still know how to deal with it or what to do with it. But I remember an instance when things were getting really, really weird. Obviously, some of the deaths around in Rowan County, and it would be constantly like, well, we can prove without a doubt that like Joshua was not in any way physically involved in this, but it still has this connection like all the time. And it's funny when in the beginning of Stranger Things, when the sheriff is saying like, 40 years ago we had our last suicide and 60 years ago is when we had our last murder. Well, that was Granite Quarry until I showed up. And then it was a lot of things. And then I remember that the feds basically were a part of my school. Like, it was a part of a routine thing. It would not be like, I remember one time I was 16, I was trying to get an apartment, or maybe I just turned 17, I don't know, somewhere around there. But I had no place to go. I was going to school and I was working part-time. And then I remember going into this apartment place, trying to like lease an apartment, and it was kind of like laughed at. Like, I was like, they were like, you gotta be 18, you gotta do these things or whatever. And it was already after I filled the application out. Well, it wasn't but 30 minutes I left, and I went to get a bite to eat, and I get a phone call. And the leasing lady, it was as if that hour never happened. She calls me up and then started just, hi, is this Mr. Graham? We actually have your apartment fully and ready to go. The rent was like $300 less than what the pamphlet said. Like, the pamphlet was like, the rent was like $940, and then I ended up getting it for like $700 a month. Anyway, it was really weird. Like, even then, I don't know how to describe it, but it was like something or someone stepped in and said like, no, we'd probably rather have him here. Anyway, so joking, not joking, like, even Ashura, like, we joke, about our house being tapped and our house being bugged. And I know that sounds like paranoid, but it is definitely not paranoia. And I understand, as a national security threat that is genuinely trying to do good for the world and do good for the people in it, I can't fully describe my being as I know the church would love. I know that the church and all the patrons and all the religious people out there would just love to put me in a nice, neat box like you can with Jesus. And then there you go. Like, all your questions are answered. Like, all your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted. Coming from me personally, I am as transparent as absolutely possible. And I swear and testify to this, sweareth I, saith Joshua, unto Yahweh Elohim, but as Yahweh Elohim. This is true. This is not bullshit. This is not made up. These are the jagged edges of my life that I still, like, I know when humans, you guys think of like grand mysteries and things. These are the mysteries that I think about. These are the things that keep me up at night, because I have to try to reconcile that too. And I know it sounds dumb, but there's a guy online that he goes by Hugo Logo or something. He's somewhere up in the Netherlands, I think. But he's the only person so far that I've ever seen that actually has like credible, real powers similar to mine. I mean, granted, his are just like object manipulation, like a level of telekinesis. And I mean, I can do that too. I can do a lot. And so it's like, I don't know, in my mind, I guess I look at him as maybe he's like an incarnated little god, Maybe he's like Thor or like Odin, I don't know. And then just for my own mental exercises, like, maybe he somehow manifested his own thing, like Ragnarok. Like, I remember after watching a few of his YouTube videos, trying to go and check his mind, and I'm like, I can't. I'm like, okay, so like I'm kind of investigating these matters for myself, and it's like, okay, I can check his mind out. But then shortly thereafter, I start seeing, this was years ago now, I started seeing this show, Ragnarok. I'm like, what the hell is Ragnarok, right? And then I'm looking into it, and it's some kind of like end of the world thing, and then you have like these like Nordic Viking gods and stuff, like, I don't know. And I'm not, all I'm simply saying is the left foot goes one way, and then the right foot every time comes right alongside that left foot, and it's like all the time. And I wish I could go back in time. I mean, I can go back in time, but I wish I could go back in time and see my mom's situation to give her answers, and I can't. I wish I could go back in time and see my own circumstances, but I can't. I just know that it's surrounded with mystery. It has involved the feds, and I mean, still to this day, I know that the feds keep me on a tight leash. And, I feel like there are people out there that know more about me than I know about me. And, since I was a little child, like, I knew that I had special abilities in these things, and, I always wanted just to try to use them for good, kick the asses of the bad guys type of thing. And, I guess in a way that's kind of at its bare minimum. What I still feel like, is my purpose in a heavenly sense is to downtrod evil and wicked, and to raise up good people. Because at the minimum, I want this world to be better for my children and better to my children. The world has not been nice to me. The world has not been nice to my mother, and I don't even know what part she plays in this, except for knowing that when she gets drunk, she is going to talk about the place that she don't know it was at, and that's the thing, you know. I remember bringing this up to my mom, and I was talking about, like, you know, when I uncovered like some MK Ultra things, and then I made the connection to the USS Eldridge, and then like the Philadelphia experiment, and even then she's like, I don't know why I feel like I know this, but I don't know this. She's like, it feels familiar, but I don't know. There's nothing there. And I'm like, it's like a file, right? It's like a file folder that has the name on it, but you open that folder and there's nothing there. And you know damn well that there's years worth of shit in those file folders. And she agreed, and she's like, and then that's when, like, probably one of the few times my mom and I have ever had like this really genuine connection where like she hugs me and she's like, you understand what I'm trying to say? And I'm like, I do, I get it. I'm like, I've been called freak my whole life, and obviously things have not improved. And that's another thing, you know, trust me, there's nothing more than I would love to do than to help the world and do those things in which I need to do. And that's the thing, like, what came first, right? Was I just born the way I am and anomalies occurred, and then they've investigated me my whole life and put my mom through the ringer, and then, like, it's just that? Or is it a mixture of things? I don't know. I really don't know. But I know, you know, that I'm not crazy, because, I mean, as a kid, as a teenager, I used to get, like, not paranoid, but I would joke, you know, when I go into these things. I even went to the Neuro Institute of Tampa when I got here. That's another thing. Like, I had to check in with these people. And it was right near USF, right near, I'll say it was Bruce B. Downs and Fletcher Avenue. It was called the Neuro Institute of Tampa. And, you know, I remember that, like, I never had any insurance, but I remember that these visits never cost anything. You know, and then I remember, like, many times, like, when I would go in and start reporting, like, yeah, I'm going through this period again where I don't sleep. I remember they'd give me, like, a Lazaropram, and that would help with, like, going to sleep at night sometimes. But other than that, like, I was never prescribed medication. I mean, you know. And I remember seeing these people, and I mean, jokingly, I'm like, so am I just schizo? Like, what's the deal? You know, they're like, no, you're definitely not schizo. They're like, no, Josh, you're special. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure you tell that to everybody. And they're like, no, actually not everybody. But, you know, so I remember, like, this one nice lady saying, like, you're gonna do great things, don't you worry. Like, I think you're gonna be just fine. You know? And then I remember when I was finally out on my own, so now coming up into, like, 18, 19, I finally had an established apartment. And I remember back in this exact feeling. I remember this was a period when I started like dating, and I was like kind of hitting the bar scene as a young man, and, you know, going to places, and it was like trying to put as much distance between me and whatever life I had. I'm just trying to, like, reinvent myself. This was obviously back in, you know, back in like 05, 06, 07. And then I remember, like, kind of having this feeling like, hey, they've left me alone finally. Like, maybe it was, you know, just, maybe I made more of a deal out of it than I should have, type of thing. Take us up a little bit so she's not overwhelming. But I remember, so I was thinking like, hey, maybe they finally got the hell out of here. They got out of my life. And it was like probably the same week that I get a knock on my door one day, and it was a guy. They're due the census apparently, and I didn't think anything of it. But at the same time, I never had a census done. I didn't know what the hell it was for. Now as an adult, I know it sure as hell wasn't the census. I know the census doesn't go through your stuff. I know the census doesn't ask you personal questions, relationship questions. It doesn't ask for phone numbers and contacts of people that I've been in contact with. It doesn't go through those things. And the exact same person showed up to do his census twice a year for about 3 years. And it was right about that time that all those new friends that I made never answered the phone again. They never came over again. And this happens periodically throughout my life, and I don't really know why. Like, is the government like going to these people telling them to stay away from me? Are they scaring them? Or are they just telling them about me? I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know, but I can also tell you that this morning, I think what stirred this was going outside to put the can out, seeing a cigarette butt at the end of my driveway, and fresh truck tracks. I guess maybe brought this to the forefront because I remember as a teenager, my mom would say, "Go look out the window." And I did. And it was always these black SUVs, just like the one that lives next to me now, just like the ones that hang out on my street, just like all of the workers. I've had people working on water mains that have not broken. I have people that have worked on electrical wires that are not broken. I've had every type of service repair van sitting out in front of my fucking house for a very long time. And for the longest time, I don't know if they've been protecting me or hindering me. Maybe both. But I know that when I was about 20, maybe a little older, I remember I was almost like obsessed with work, because I was like, if I'm working, I feel normal, right? Like I'm just normal. I'm just like, I know it sounds dumb, but I remember like, I felt so proud, like getting up at 6 a.m. Like I'm an adult. I'm just a normal person. Like, look at me, I'm stopping at McDonald's. I'm getting breakfast. Look at me, how normal I am. I'm actually coming into an office. People say hi, how normal I am, And I remember always feeling like I'm on this ball trying to balance it, and at all costs trying to make sure that I was not going to like fall off that ball, I don't know why that's doing that. But, like I said, I don't know. I guess if anything, this just serves as a historical log of nouns, people, places, and things that have occurred, and I don't know how or why. But I remember when I was about 20, 22 maybe, after again this fresh round of friends never seems, and that's what I mean. It ain't like I ever got a goodbye. It ain't like I ever got an explanation. It's literally like I go to call them and now their number's not working. I would go, and this happened to Asher, my wife, and I've chalked it up sometimes to like, well, it's my will being done. And I'm sure that is the case in a lot of things, because I know it's the case with most people in the world. But, for example, like, me and Ashley went out to dinner. This was like 2015. And she was normal. Ashley's still pretty normal. I mean, like I said, she has held this job now for 6 years. She's a manager. She does really well. It's a big corporation. Like, she's pretty normal in all those things. But I remember going out to a dinner, like very simple, and I remember I was totally normal. Like, I was as normal could be. I remember we went to this place called Rick's on the River. It was in Tampa. I think it was off of Hillsborough Avenue. I gotta sneeze. Excuse me. And for all intents and purposes, it went well. Like, we even had a photo, like, of all of us together. And I never seen them again. And Ashley too, when she would like go to call either one of them, they didn't pick up, they didn't answer. We never seen them again. And she was friends with them since elementary school. She's always lived in the same area, so she's had friends since like elementary, kindergarten stuff. And then like her best friend, like she was the best lady at the wedding. Like, she was that close with this friend. And then a series of events happened, and that friend ceased to be a friend. So I don't know. I really don't know, And that's the thing. Like, it's really bothersome to have, like, I know my intentions are in the right, and I keep forgetting to say this, and I don't know why I'm dancing around the bush, but at like 2022, I remember, like, when Google really started taking effect, like, as I mean, because kind of before, like other than encyclopedias, you ain't gonna find much. But I remember when like Google first started really kicking, so like 05, 06, I remember like trying to research as much as I could, and I was just trying to like use the keywords like what am I if I can do this. And so I'm kind of like putting in my long explanations. Well, long story short, I came up with nothing. And I came up with no other people like me. And I don't know. I feel like people want, Jesus to return. I know the truth behind that. I can't tell you he's coming because he's not, I can tell you the truth about Yeshua. I can tell you the truth about all the things that I've went back in time and seen. I can tell you that heaven's a real place. I can't tell you that if I single-handedly created it and then it transversed back in time. I don't know when the bubble starts and ends. I just know it's real. And I know that I have the dominion over it. And then it's like when I just take those things and then apply them to biblical scripture, even not going into the details or the minutia, but just going into a high-level overview, I'm like, okay, well, this makes more sense. I am he who makes exist. That's like the most steadfast explanation of who I am in one sentence. I am he who makes exist. And I can make things exist for good, or I can make things exist for bad. It really depends on my heart. It really depends on my mind. It depends on, like, these factors. And I just look at it like, if the world, if the world wants to, like, stand inside their sanitary Bible zone, then I don't know how I'm going to help you. Meanwhile, if the world stands in their sinful, dirty zone, I can't help you. If you want me to tell you that I fall into this, that, and the other, I don't know what to tell you. All I know is what I've told you. And that these things in which I'm telling you, I swear and hereby testify that it to be true. And my mother swear and testify to it to be true as well. Alright, we'll take a 5. Alright, and we're back for the final part here. I had to pick up a kid from school. And you know, I don't really know what to make of it, you know, but I know that honesty is the best policy, you know, and it wasn't just into the last like 3.5 to 4 years that I found a purpose for my gifts. And you know, creation itself has been an interesting, like, from my viewpoint, because, you know, creating things from just my mind, right? Literally making something exists. But what came first? You know? What came first? And I mean, the answer is everything in creation must have reconciliation. So, interpretation, meaning if you were looking at a movie and this clip ends, it can never end there. Instead, it must be attached to the next sequence, the next film, right? And I don't know what to make of it. You know, quite frankly. Was I born as Yahweh Elohim Yahuwah? Yes. Have I been studied by men of science and people in government? Yes. Is my mother absolutely been put through the mill because of these things? Yes. Has it been easy being a literal person in between two worlds? It's not easy, you know. And I guess to top the cake off on the whole Stranger Things parallel, you know, my first day of 9th grade, I walk in the front door of East Rowan High School in Rowan County, North Carolina. And the moment I opened the door, I could feel the energy of every living person that was in those hallways at the same exact time, and it overwhelmed me, and I had a massive nosebleed. And when I had the massive nosebleed, the power went completely out. I swear if I say if the 1,500 plus witnesses that were there, and my neighbor at the time, again, I won't say a name because I don't want to put people out there like that, but my neighbor at the time was really kind to me, and she might have been in 11th grade. And you know, and so she actually took me in on my first day of school, and quickly thereafter I went right back home. So, last one, and then I guess I'll wrap it. But I was telling Asher in the car, and these are all things she's heard before, so it ain't like it's anything new. It's not groundbreaking to her, But I was telling her about the time that my mom's boyfriend, more than a boyfriend, I mean, they weren't married, but they were together for 10 years. And, he was a binge drinker, so he could go months without drinking anything. And he was a decent guy, he worked, he drove a truck. Well, anyway, he went on one of his binge drinking times with his buddy. Well, this time, I was newly in the scene. So back in the late 90s, maybe 98, 99. And I guess he really didn't fully get the full scale of the baggage really that came with my mom and me, because after one of his benders he came home and he was telling us a story about how he was being followed, and that he was in the middle of a bender, and he, to his own testimony, I wasn't there, he's deceased now, but he was saying something to the effect that he felt like he was drugged. He was showing us this needle mark in the back of his neck type of thing. And then he came home and he was telling us the story. His car was wrecked, that he was being chased, and that when he came home that he was blaming it on my mom and me, and that's again where I was called demon child, that all these weird things happen, and so he was looking in the trailer for all the bugs that he was saying were bugging us, and Ashley, my wife, goes, "So were they really bugs?" And I said, "Well, to be honest, when I was a kid I didn't know what the term meant." I said, "But when I was a kid, yeah, we had roaches, so I was thinking well, man, there's plenty of bugs here, I don't know what you're crying over, but not that kind of bug, obviously, now I know that." But I remember he slammed his fist down and was shouting at my mom, "See, I told you," he was telling her, "You're not being honest with me, what the hell's going on?" And then he suspected her of cheating. In this particular time, I remember waiting in the park to go to the Neuro Institute in Salisbury, and she met some person and then told me to come back, sit in the car. And then she went in this house with this person, and then she came out, and she never told me what it was about. Well, her boyfriend accused her of cheating. I didn't know what was going on. I just know I went to my appointment thereafter. And my appointments were always pretty much the same. I would sit in a chair, kind of laid back. It was kind of up in the air. They put probes kind of around my head. And then usually they would do strobes. I've never been epileptic. I've never had a seizure. But they would do strobe effects, and then record it. And they would play audible sounds, then write stuff down, and then they'd give me flashcards, and then they'd basically and there was one I remember where I was given the cards, and then they were telling me to put up which one. I don't know if it was somebody else telling me what, I don't remember. I think it was something to the tune of hold up what card you feel is being held up, I guess, in the next room or something. And so it'd be it was weird. And then interesting in the Stranger Things parallel too, when the mom is talking about her trap memories, right? I can't remember what they are, but I remember rainbow, and I remember there was a rainbow card. I remember there was a rainbow card, And last one, then I'm done. My mom and her boyfriend separated shortly after that because he ended up going to prison. I'm not even sure what. I think he actually went to prison for aiding and abetting minors, which I'm not quite sure what that means and what happened. But anyway, so I remember going to one of my mom's friend's house one time, and they had like a pond out in the back, or a lake or something like that, a water with a little dock. And I didn't know anybody there, but they had kids around my age, and they were out there fishing. And I remember I threw my line in, and I started feeling like a fish was on there. You know, I'm like, oh great, it's a fish. It's probably like maybe 10, maybe 11. Anyway, and so I'm reeling this thing in, and it ended up being a briefcase. And when I reeled the briefcase in, I opened it, and it had the same types of blocks that they were giving me in school. Like, they would take me out of class and take me to a room, and they'd tell me to, you know, look at this image. I'd look at the image, and then they'd take the image away, and they'd make me do all the blocks to match the image. In that briefcase, I pulled up the same exact thing. And I had no one there that was relevant. They could understand why it was so interesting, because I was more than intrigued. I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, guys, like, this is the same stuff. And the other kids, you don't give a shit, you know. They don't care. There's no adults around to care. You know. My mom would just say, like, I can't take anymore. I can't take anymore. Joshua, I cannot take anymore. And I'll say, okay. You know. So anyway, I guess we'll cap it there. You know, I don't know what the point of this is, but I do know that if it's something that sits with me overnight, and then I get some kind of a confirmation the next day that it's something I should at least record, then I do. So, alrighty, well, have a good rest of your day, and maybe we'll see you tomorrow.